Well, the Reserve Bank fears unemployment will rise next year as Australians feel the full effect of rate rises. The predicted uptick in unemployment is a key reason the RBA minutes were released for keeping the cash rate on hold at 4.35% this month. The bank also expects inflation to stay higher for longer, not reaching the band of 2 to 3% until the end of 2025. Joining me now live is the Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume. Thanks for your time. Look, I know you're going to focus on Labor's role on inflation, but I want to ask on the RBA's view of this. If they believe inflation will stay above target until the end of 2025, is that acceptable to have inflation that high for that long? Should they have ambition to bring it lower earlier?
Well, the RBA have already said that they have a very low tolerance for sustained inflation and inflation staying above that 2 to 3% band any later than the end of 2025, which is when they predict it will come back into the band. Of course, their frustration is compounded by the fact that they are doing all the work to get inflation down. And they try and do that without pushing the economy into a recession. Now, we're already in a per capita recession. If it wasn't for those high migration figures, we would, in fact, see GDP going backwards in this country. However, the RBA are acutely conscious that if they keep pushing rates up that bit higher every single time, well, it can have some detrimental effects on the economy. The reason why they have to do that, Tom, and I know you and I have spoken about this a lot before, is because you've got two tools in the shed, not just monetary policy, fiscal policy as well. And the government isn't doing its fair share of the heavy lifting. That's why the RBA has to keep doing more and more to try and tame inflation, bring it back down into that 2 to 3% band, even if it is taking longer. Of course, the longer it takes, the more it hurts your hip pocket, because inflation is the thief in the night that erodes your savings, it eats at your purchasing power. And unless they do all that work, well, they have to do it because the government isn't.
Okay, so you've said your element on the government. Understand that. Parking that for a moment. Should the RBA have grander ambitions and not see end of 2025 for inflation to get back just at the top of that target band, not within it, the top of it? Is that too late?
You can sense their frustration, can't you? Of course, that's their job, is to keep inflation in that 2 to 3% band. But you keep saying don't talk about the government, but the government isn't making their life any easier. That's why it's taking until 2025 If the RBA moves
that's
too
part
hard
of it. There's two elements,
and too fast
as you say,
to bring inflation back
policy
down into band, but that's the thing. If the RBA moved to bring that... It's not just up to monetary policy settings. This is the thing, Tom. Monetary policy is really powerful, but it's also a massively blunt instrument. It only affects a certain proportion of the population, and that's the proportion that are really feeling this cost of living crisis.
I understand that.
Whereas
but my point
if
is
the government used its fiscal policy power, it could be far more targeted.
What I'm saying is you've mentioned fiscal policy. What about monetary policy? Are we not seeing enough ambition, given with the settings at the moment, apparently 2 more entire years of inflation above target?
Yeah, that's extraordinarily frustrating. But if the RBA moved any harder, they could push the economy into recession because of the disproportionate way that monetary policy affects Australian families and households, but also businesses as well. Businesses that rely on borrowings to fund their operations or to fund their capital investment. So that will slow the economy right down if the RBA pushes too hard and too fast, which is why we've been calling on the government to use fiscal policy to try and get to a stage where that reduction in aggregate demand is more evenly shared across the economy. That will bring inflation back down under control, hopefully before that end of 2025, so that it doesn't disproportionately affect particularly mortgage holders, but also though that knock-on effect to people like renters, because of course landlords are affected by high interest rates as well. That gets passed on as high rent.